Just turning on the live stream. We were just having an issue with Zoom, so we just want to confirm everything's working. So it appears that we're good to go. I know we're a couple minutes late here. Our apologies again for that. Okay, so Councillor McGuire, when you are set to go, we'll count you in.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, so I'll count us in 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon and welcome to our October 25th edition of Committee of the Whole. On October 25th, 2021, we acknowledge that this sacred land on which Smith Falls is now located has been the site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We are also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in the making of the Riel Canal, which runs through Smith Falls. We are mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together, may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. We've got a full slate of council here tonight. CEO Morris, can you take the attendance of staff, please?
Yes, certainly, Mr. Chair. So we have a broad spectrum of staff here with us tonight. We have Director McMunn, Director Manhire, Director Costello. We have Manager of Economic Development and Tourism, Julia Crowder. Who else do we have? We have Janet Kozil, our Treasurer, and Carl Grenke, our Senior Planner. And of course, the always present Nadine Bennett, our Deputy Clerk.
Great, thank you, CEO Morris. I'll take any amendments to the agenda tonight. Mayor Panko.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me add with committee's consent 2 items, 2 recommendations coming from the Housing Advisory Committee, 2 resolutions for consideration from Council, 1 related to changes to the Ontario Building Code, and 1 related to 2022 budget.
Seeing nodding heads, everybody's good with that. So we will add 8.7 changes to the building code, and 8.8 that was changes to the 2022 budget.
Thank you.
Perfect. Write them down so I don't forget at the end of the meeting. Next up, we have disclosure of monetary interest. Does anybody have anything to disclose tonight? Not seeing anything, we'll move on to, we don't have any delegations, so we'll go to adoption of minutes. Anyone move? Councillor Alford, seconded by Councillor Allen, that the minutes of the September 20th, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting be received and filed. All those in favor? And that carries. So now we'll go into CIO Director's Report. CEO Morris, do you want to lead this one?
Yes, we have several this evening, Mr. Chair, and we can start with Director Manhire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few quick ones this evening. The water level in the basins will be going down today, starting over the next couple of days. So the docks have all been prepared and the water levels, Parks Canada has started moving those down. They should be down by the end of this week. So people will see a change in the basin. I just wanted to kind of update on some of the happenings at Heritage House Museum. I know it was mentioned in the last meeting about all the great things that they're doing, but they've had a number of different events where there's been over 500 participants over the last few days and 48 volunteers involved in the delivery of that service. So they've done just a wonderful job and been very pleased with the impact on the community, and lots of participation in the haunted house, as well as some of the ghost tours and other activities. So there's still coming up, there's a Victorian exhibit that's happening there, as well as a cinema exhibit. So something to watch for. And this weekend, just as an update, there's a very large tournament, the Cup tournament, that's going to be happening at the community center. So it will be a very busy place from Friday right through until Sunday evening. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Director Manhire. Any questions, Councillor Alford?
just wondering about the Colonel when he's going to his winter rest.
Staff have been pursuing the Colonel over the last couple of days to try to corral him up. So we hope to do that today. We've reached out to Parks Canada actually to get a little bit of a helping hand. So in the next day or two.
Thank you, Art.
Thanks. Seeing no other questions, I think we can go to our next one. Thank you, Director Manhire.
So next up, we have Ms. Crowder from Economic Development.
Good evening, through you, Mr. Chair. Just a few updates. Last week, staff attended the Ontario East Municipal Conference, as well as the RTO 11 Regional Tourism Summit. There's some really good conversation and allowed us to connect with colleagues and with regional partners. There's a lot of information shared about new grants coming up. There was a heavy focus on affordable housing, workforce development, and COVID recovery over those two conferences. And today was our fall job fair. So it was really successful despite the weather. We had 10 businesses, 3 community partners, and we had over 50 job seekers come out. So it was really successful. We had really positive feedback from employers as well as job seekers. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Crowder. Any questions? Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Chair, the last one would be mine. It'll be brief, but I'm extremely delighted to announce that just last week we got confirmation from the province that our Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, that's transfer money that comes from the province each year to assist with our operating budget, was confirmed. The amount is the same as last year. So that checks a big box off our 2022 budget pursuits that we're working on right now. And Treasurer Kuzil will have more on that later in the agenda, but we were delighted to get that news just last week.
Great. Thank you, CEO Morris. I think that's a 3.5 million great news story. Councillor McKenna, did you have a question for CEO Morris?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you. CEO Morris, I'm thrilled, obviously, to receive that funding announcement. It was interesting when I looked at some of the other local municipalities about our size, Carleton Place and Perth, significantly less. And I know there's a formula that they use to arrive at that dollar amount, but it just struck me, I think Carleton Place was in the hundreds of thousands and Perth was less than half of ours. Could you just remind me and maybe anyone watching why the discrepancy would be that big? I'm not complaining, I just wanted to understand it.
Yeah, great question. And through the chair, I would begin to answer that by saying there are several components to the formula. I think there are 3 or 4 elements to it. And ours has largely been higher because of economic circumstances historically. But perhaps I'll turn it over to Treasurer Kuzil. She may have more detail she could share.
Thank you, CEO Morris. There is 5 different components to the grant. 2 of the larger ones is the assessment equalization grant. And as Malcolm alluded to, our assessments that have historically been lower than some of our partners until MPAC does their next 4-year cycles, the remaining status quo. And the other one is the Northern and Rural Physical Circumstances, which is at 1.1. So again, that's based on average incomes, household incomes, that sort of thing.
If I may, Mr. Chair, thank you both for that explanation. And it's very close to what I understood. I guess as we head into the budget discussion, I think we will want to, although it will be a couple of years down the road, we'll want to mitigate the impact when our assessments are brought up to speed, because it may, if this formula stays the way it is, may seriously impact our budget in the next couple of years. So just a heads up to all of us to keep an eye on that one. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McKenna. And Deputy Clerk Bennett, did you have a report tonight?
It's just quickly, I'll do a quick overview from our emergency control group meeting on behalf of Fire Chief Cheeseborough, who's unable to attend tonight. Just a quick update. We did meet last week. Our group meets regular every 2 weeks. We are currently in a state of emergency still, and that is assessed at every meeting and will be discussed at our next meeting in 2 weeks. Just a note that at the meeting, the vaccination status from public health at the time was that adults had received second dose in the percentage of 93.5%. The first dose was 97.7%. Children ages 12 to 17, second dose was 83.8%, and the first dose was 89.6%, and that was as of last Thursday. We did have Dr. Stewart in attendance at our meeting, and she provided a great update on behalf of public health. She noted that that we can proceed with low-risk events such as Remembrance Day, Santa Claus Parade, and Halloween. Staff are working with the organizers of those events, and everyone will be reminded to adhere to provincial regulations. And if anything is to change at the provincial level, those plans may be altered. The other item that was discussed was our vaccination policy, and there is a report coming later this evening respecting that. And staff also brought forward from community services that they've implemented procedures for vaccine verification of users that attend or rent space at our recreation facility. And there will be a press release coming forward later this week about that. And that's basically it. We will meet again in 2 weeks.
Great, thank you, Deputy Clerk Bennett. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, I think, does that wrap up our reports tonight, CO Morris? So we will go to 6.1. It's a letter from the Perth and Smith Falls District Hospital Foundation that we contribute $174,341 out of the 2022 budget. I think this is in line with past years. So with council's or committee's agreement, we'll put that on the agenda for a future meeting with budget discussions. Great. And the other item is a request to raise sorry, it's just loading here for me. A request to raise the Metis flag on November 16th to celebrate Louis Riel Day from the Highland Waters Métis Council. Is that something that we want to discuss at a future meeting, or can we just go ahead with it? Mayor Penko?
Well, Councilor McKenna was first, I guess.
Sorry, okay.
No, that's fine. I got a feeling we might be saying the same thing. Go ahead, please.
Well, I guess we have a flag policy, and I'm interested to hear from staff what the flag policy's position is regarding requests like this. And second to that, I was going to suggest if we want some feedback from a racism discrimination task force, we are meeting this week, and we could have a discussion on Wednesday and bring it back to committee of the whole at the next opportunity.
Great, so we'll look forward to hearing back on this in the beginning of November. Any other questions, comments before we move on? Not seeing any, we'll now go in camera, so I'll take a motion to move in camera. Moved by Councillor Dwyer, seconded by Councillor Brennan. The Council of the Corporation of the Town of Smith Falls is provided in Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended. Move into a closed meeting at 5:16 p.m. to address a personnel issue about an identifiable individual relating to a committee appointment. All those in favor? That is carried. So we will go in camera and come back soon.
Just moving everyone to the breakout room.
I will say, while we're waiting, I'm in the midst of completing the MAP program, the Municipal Administration Program on municipal finance. And all of my examples of local municipal work is coming from Janet. I won't lie. Janet, you're a rock star. Thank you. I'm pilfering all of your examples. It's fantastic.
Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, Nikki. Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
So, Mr. Chair, we've hit a bit of a bump in the road in getting in the breakout room, but we're working on it.
Anybody have any jokes? Should we vote on best hamburgers again?
I'll just let everybody know that this is we're being live streamed right now. I just checked YouTube, so heads up.
Sorry about this. Okay, thanks. I apologize, everyone. We're not sure what's going on. We tested this a million times, but it's not working. So I'm just wondering, we may have to defer this item, unfortunately. There's something wrong with the Zoom platform to allow us to go in camera. So unfortunately, I apologize, but that's the only option we have at this time, unless Councillor Alfred, I apologize. We'll have to defer the item for now.
Okay.
He's going to see if we can work it, fix it, but there's something with the Zoom. It seems that we've had issues logging on since the beginning, so we're not sure what's going on. I apologize for that.
Yeah, this is an important one to the DBA, and the sooner it can get done, the better. So if he can work it out while we're still at this meeting, I'd like to handle it.
Okay, we'll see what we can do.
Perhaps we can just defer the item. Is it pressing, Nadine?
Certainly, yeah, that's kind of what I was hoping, but Councillor Alfred noted that it is pressing, so we're going to see if we can fix something on the back end while we proceed with the next item, and then see if we can get it working. We apologize. It's something with Zoom, a glitch that we've had since the beginning of the meeting, so we'll see if we can get it fixed. So Chair McGuire, if you don't mind proceeding with the next one, I'll see if we can get this fixed, and I will let you know if we can proceed into in camera.
Okay, great. So we're still live. Cool. So we'll defer item 7. Do we need a motion to move out of camera, or are we okay to just go on to 8.1?
Well, we actually didn't move in camera. We moved in camera, so I'll make a note in the minutes that there was a technical glitch, and we will proceed.
Okay, great. So that brings us to 8.1, Parks and Recreation Master Plan Report. Director Manhire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a very exciting time to present to you our Parks and Recreation Master Plan. This Parks and Recreation Master Plan is something we've been working on for a period of time. It represents a priority identified in the strategic priorities for council, 2.3 and 2.4, and also represents the first time that we've had a Parks and Recreation Master Plan in the town. So we're very excited to be at the point that we're at with this process. So we've engaged RC Strategies to help us with this process. We've done a fair bit of consultation, and we'll present a high level overview at this point, just so that we can kind of let people know what the priorities are and the recommendations coming out of that. So the rest of the background is in the report, but I'll leave it to Michael and Stephen from RC Strategies to lead us through the highlights.
Thank you, Art. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Chair, members of council. You ready to go? Okay. Everybody sees the deck. Steve's controlling the deck tonight. And I'm just going to take you all through a very high-level overview of the master plan document that you've received. Steve, next slide, please. And then the overview of the presentation is really just a high-level summary of the master plan, as well as the suggested actions and strategies and actions, and a little bit of a focus around the major implementation items. The report's exhaustive, and we know you had a busy meeting tonight, so we've just tried to focus on the critical top line items. Next slide, Steve. The master plan is a document that you've received. It's one of 3 documents that we prepared for this project. The first was a comprehensive background study, some 100 pages of text and graphics and analysis that culminate, draw together all of the research that was completed for the project, as well as the consultation activities, a summary of them that was undertaken for the project. We also completed a separate playground strategy for Smiths Falls, given that issue emerged earlier in the study process as something that required a bit more of a deeper dive. And so there's a separate document that looks at playgrounds from a theme perspective around development ideas for playgrounds and analysis of the playground environment in Smiths Falls, as well as recommendations that were carried forward into the master plan document itself, and that we'll touch on tonight. Next slide, Steve. So the master plan itself is the key document. It's intended for public viewing. It's written for that purpose, and it contains 9 sections. Pretty straightforward. Here they are. We establish in section 4 in particular a bit of a foundation for the plan. What is the purpose of Parks and Recreation, and why does a town like Smiths Falls support public parks and recreation? Why does it invest in it? And then section 5 and section 6 and section 7 are really around the strategies organized by service delivery, which is really the operational framework for the Parks and Recreation Division, the Community Services Department. It's the things that it does, and it gets at how it does those things. And there's suggestions for how some of those policies and practices can be enhanced over time. And then specific section around Parkland strategies, which presents a few high-level ideas around acquiring and developing parkland over the next 10 years in Smiths Falls. And then section 7 highlights some specific infrastructure and asset recommendations that are prioritized based on drawing together a lot of the research and consultation insights developed through the planning process. Next slide, Steve. So we've established a set of principles for this plan, and they really answer the question about what Parks and Recreation in Smiths Falls is. Inclusive, service excellent orientated, it's collaborative, works with community partners, it's efficient. Every effort is taken to provide the most value for money, and in the future, more data-driven, more systems and practices that are collecting data, and that data is incorporated into the planning and decision-making process. All of which is supported by good technology and good practices and great staff continuing to provide the services that they do in the community. Next slide, Steve. So when we focus on service delivery strategies, this is in section 5 of the master plan, we're looking at really 8 core delivery strategies. And they're, as I said, intended to optimize Parks and Recreation service delivery while re-embedding the practices that work well. Next slide, Steve. I'm going to take you through each of them and provide a few highlights, not all, but a few highlights of some of the actions that the plan recommends some focus or investment on. So strategy 1 is really targeting program initiatives that achieve a targeted social impact and improve utilization of the town's major recreation facilities, particularly the arena and the sports fields. This strategy is sort of premised in the research that indicates that there is a relatively lower than ideal level of minor youth activity occurring in some of your facilities, particularly the arena, where there's relatively few children learning hockey programs, for example, compared to what we would see in communities of similar size, where there's maybe a well-functioning, long-standing recreational house league for young children to learn to play the sport of hockey. These programs are really important because they secure a bit of a pipeline of players that develop and learn to play the game, continue playing it well into their adult lives. And so the action highlights are really about investing in the partnerships, or in some cases, maybe providing directly programs that achieve that level of opportunity, or those opportunities in the community for the public to participate in, which secures time in your facilities, sees them used, and that's all in the interest of optimizing the system. When facilities are full and busy, that's always a better situation than when there's a little bit of slack in the system. And there's also opportunity to, sorry, Steve, there's also a little opportunity to directly deliver a few more low cost or no cost programs that really target children and youth in the community. A strong viewpoint expressed was the interest in more non-ice, particularly non-ice winter programs for the residents to enjoy, mainly focused on children and youth. That was a theme in the survey findings in particular. While there are many third parties that offer those programs, it's very difficult for them to offer them at a commercially attractive rate for the public. And so the suggestion here is that the municipality, where appropriate, where they can get that targeted impact, directly offer programs like learn to play pick-up sports like basketball or soccer, field sports like that. Introduce children to sport is the idea here, and that the municipality have a direct role in that. Next slide, Steve. You're eager to get there. Strategy 2 is all about a bit more of a focus around optimizing the sport field utilization, or a system of utilizing sport fields. The practices in Smiths Falls that have been used for some time don't really provide any great data for understanding utilization. And I say that with much respect to staff and the folks that use the system. There just isn't a lot of data available because of the way in which the system, the fields themselves are permitted. They're charged out on a per team basis, and that really doesn't help a planner like us analyze utilization trends. And so the suggestion here is really to introduce a policy that charges organizations that use the fields in a different way, and also introduces some different practices and policies that will facilitate greater data being collected around the utilization, the actual use of these fields, so that staff can make decisions on operating them, maintaining them, making sure that services are provided when people are there, and making sure that they're not providing services when perhaps people aren't there. Next slide, Steve. This slide is all about supporting organizations. The strategy it is all about supporting organizations who are really, in many cases, all not-for-profit, volunteer-based organizations who are starting to recover, coming out of the COVID period, and into an environment that is very different than the one that they stopped operating in some time ago, prior to COVID, that is. They need support. They need resources. They're challenged. Many have lost volunteers, are struggling to reconnect with volunteers. And so there's a suggestion here around dedicated, specific, targeted investment in supporting these organizations by helping them recruit volunteers, helping them market their services more directly, supporting them with grant writing, providing training and learning opportunities for board members to really enhance the work that the organizations do and strengthen their governance practices. Smiths Falls, as a community development oriented recreation and parks division, does this already, and organizations acknowledge that. So this is more an action that's focused on supporting organizations restarting through COVID, who are needing the support and who are your predominant partners in the community. So you really need them to be strong and successful in order for you to, as an organization, as a municipality, to reach a lot of your budget targets and ensure that they continue to offer the services that they do using your facilities. Next slide, Steve. A little bit of a focus on data. Again, this is all in the interest of collecting data that really supports data-driven decision-making going forward. And so, well, of course, the corporation is undergoing asset management planning. There's a real need for the Recreation and Parks group to focus on their investment in asset management planning through acquiring systems that help them track what they do, what's there, its condition, And to do a lot of that in a more centralized way, and particularly in a more of an automated way, as opposed to some of the practices that were seen to be used, which most municipalities are transitioning away from. Moving from paper into automated record keeping, automated inspections of things like weekly inspections of playgrounds and other outdoor environments that staff spend time in. This is also about really just understanding performance of the system and ensuring that there's a system of managing or understanding cost recovery, using accounting, activity-based accounting practices to inform the setting of rates and fees. This requires dedicated staff commitment. And through our discussions with staff, certainly something that they are moving towards. In some cases, have moved quite significantly forward on. So it's really just reinforcing the continued need to keep doing that. Strategy 5 is all about strengthening the trails and park system with respect to future development in the town, and particularly through the town's official plan. The analysis suggests that you have ample parkland. You're currently providing about 3.78 hectares per about 1,000 people. And so the suggestion in this plan is to maintain that provision as you grow. So that means you're adding a little more as you grow to maintain it. And the recommendation is to add that additional parkland in centrally located parks in new communities on well located flat tableland through the development process. So in other words, you want to be acquiring great flat developable parkland for new residents to move into and live in great complete communities, particularly in the Bellamy Farms area or in other communities that might develop over the next 10 years that are in similar scope and size. There's some tools in Strategy 6 that we're suggesting you consider adopting, given consideration around the development charges study that you're doing right now, which is a financial tool, a significant one. You may also, as a council, investigate adopting a parkland dedication bylaw. And this allows you to acquire parkland at a permitted rate of up to 1 hectare per 300 units. You need to have a dedicated parkland dedication bylaw to do that under the Planning Act, under the Municipal Act. And so you do need some background studies to understand the extent of your needs and whether or not this tool is appropriate for you through those studies. So this is really just suggesting another tool that you could look at to achieve a little more parkland and perhaps specify through policy some more detailed requirements around the quality of parkland that you might prefer to take and how you expect to work with a developer to acquire and possibly develop it. Those are all interests that could be set in a parkland dedication bylaw. Strategy 7 is about the waterfront parks, the jewel of the park system for sure in Smiths Falls. And there is an interest, I think, shared mutually and a mutual interest to collaborate with Parks Canada around really completing the vision of what these parklands represent to the community and to the region, and frankly, to the nation, given the Parks Canada interest. And so there's an interest here to develop a specific and very detailed practical plan that achieves support on both sides for the level of investment that's needed to finish off furnishing projects, complete some of the trail connections that are important for the level of activity that these trails in particular receive, and to make a number of other investments around shoreline regeneration, and essentially enhance the partnership that is already in place and has been working for some time. Next slide, Steve. And finally, this strategy is really around, strategy 8 is around integrating park and trail assets into the town's asset management program and GIS. We spent a fair amount of time in this project really just locating things that are familiar to you, but necessary to have much more comprehensive data, your assets, your parks, your trails, where they are, their condition of them. All of that needs to go into a more comprehensive database in the very near future under legislation in Ontario. And so the suggestion here is really something that you're going to need to do in any event because of legislation, and it's just sort of recognizing that and suggesting that it be a near-term priority for staff to really assemble all of this information and make sure that they use it in their asset management programs, and that effort also collects all of the GIS information that's necessary to support decision-making in an asset management environment. Next slide, Steve. In section 7, we highlight recreation facility infrastructure priorities. And if you've had a chance to review our report, you'll appreciate how it's been put together, how we've assessed need and then looked at prioritization ranking. And so we look at really in an objective way, all of the data that we've collected, and we assign values to it, and that determines in part need, things that we've learned through research, trends, analysis on many factors related to demographics and other type of information like that in the community, and the engagement findings. And then on the prioritization ranking layer, we consider other benefits that we learn through consultation with the community and stakeholders that are important criteria for setting priorities, such as do these investments contribute to economic development? Do they provide support to vulnerable populations? Do you have some of these facilities already versus none at all? These are considerations that go into establishing criteria that we've set, which is in number 2 around how we invest or how we rank investment prioritization. So the number of actions is, we're just going to go through a key of them here, key ones of them here. Focused first on playgrounds. And I know that playgrounds are important in every community. They're important in Smiths Falls. That was very clear in the results of the survey that we heard from residents through. And so there are suggestions here related to removing various pieces of playground equipment in some parks, given its location and frankly, probably just the difficulty of having to replace it in certain locations in that park versus concentrating investment in a more well-designed, appropriate place for it. So there's suggestions around which pieces could be removed. And there's just, again, a few of those. Replacement of playground equipment at Highland Corbett Park, enhancing the playground equipment at Lower Reach Park, and adding in Victoria Falls, I should say, or Victoria Park for that matter, and then adding equipment at Memorial Arena and in the Bellamy Farms Park when that's provided or developed. So again, some specific recommendations, more specific here than in other areas of the infrastructure recommendations, in part to support some more maybe short-term planning and investment that is required for playgrounds in Smiths Falls. So you don't see this level of detail for some of the other infrastructure actions that the plan sets out. Next slide, Steve. So here we present a few highlights of facility infrastructure that really needs to be looked at more deeply and explored through a little more practical study or infrastructure level study, construction grade study, in order to maintain it. And so specifically, and most significantly, the ice arenas. The indicators are from the research that there is a softening of prime time demand, which isn't optimal. It's been ongoing for a little while. An arena typically would operate in an ideal situation and in a normal situation around, let's say, 70 to 80% utilization of prime time ice. That would be a good operating environment. It would be really good if it was around 80 to 90% utilization. Smiths Falls utilization of both rinks in prime time is less than that. And in part, that's because of the relatively few youth and minor level recreational programs that are not operating in those time slots. That tends to fill up a lot of that capacity. There's also some near-term capital investments that are likely required and need some further studies. So some significant capital reinvestment in some of the equipment in the building is upcoming. So it's an opportunity, just given the trend lines around ice sport in particular, given the little weaker demand that you currently have and could reasonably expect to remain for the foreseeable future. And the cost of capital, that there are some opportunities to think about the arena structure a little differently and perhaps look at alternative uses of it in the future, if that's a decision for council. And what we have identified here is really a support, some support from the community, an interest in the community for an indoor multi-sport facility that allows children and youth and families and adults to be inside in the winter, to play in a sporting environment like a gymnasium, which there are many of in the schools in Smiths Falls, but none publicly administered and operated. And the opportunity to provide that could come through the potential repurposing of the youth arena in particular in the future. So the report outlines, some study that needs to be done on the condition of the arena. And if the condition is such that the costs warrant seriously considering an alternative use, going into that scenario that there is some significant evidence of demand for a non-ice winter sport facility that youth arena in particular might be an ideal location for and an alternative use of. And onto the final sort of summary of recommendations around activities and infrastructure needs to maintain and monitor. There's a real active pickleball environment in Smiths Falls. There are in most communities these days, and they're organized and they have clearly staked a claim around your facilities, which is a great thing, particularly given that organized tennis activity hasn't been as active as pickleball in recent times. So something to monitor. If there's more demand from pickleball users to organize themselves and make use of your facilities, you may consider more conversion of pickleball facilities into tennis courts. It's definitely something that many municipalities have been doing, including building designated pickleball only courts. And there's examples of these around your area, I believe, as well. There is a need through data and through the implementation of the sport field allocation and utilization policies to really monitor sport field activity levels. So a lot of non-resident use of your existing sport fields and a lot of adult activity on those sport fields. Really, ideally over time would want to be a little more balanced, and you want to see more young people participating, children and youth participating in field sports, utilizing your fields for a longer period of the year, not necessarily always a concentrated late spring to just before summer break activity. You want to build the capacity of your sport organizations to make more use of those fields for longer periods of the season. And some interest around pump tracks, which are BMX tracks that have become popular and provided by many municipalities nowadays, similar to the skate parks that were provided. These attract youth. They're great community development builders because many cases municipalities organize or bring together or facilitate conversation with youth in the community around the development of these, and youth become very much involved in the operation and maintenance of these facilities as well. And just to point out that there was interest, of course, from the public around dedicated aquatics facilities, but no significant evidence of need for an indoor aquatic facility. Given the proximity that Smiths Falls is to a number of other municipalities with them and the private facility in town or near town, and the size of the community as a whole to support the operating cost of such a facility, it's something it's not needed in anywhere in the term of the 10-year horizon of the master plan. But it's always something to keep an eye on, because for sure members of the public tend to present interests around these that kind of asset in particular regularly. The plan can answer and provide a bit of context for why that asset is not necessarily a needed investment right now. Section 8 of the master plan contains really a bit of a simple, clear focus around 4 major infrastructure actions. First, really to renew playgrounds and play structures. Second, to undertake a building condition assessment of the youth arena in particular. Item number 4 is to undertake a indoor multi-sport feasibility study that could be done in conjunction with the arena building condition assessment, really just to look at alternative reuses for the arena, as I mentioned earlier, and to provide more evidence of community-based demand and flush out the costs of the conversion and ongoing operating costs of that kind of a facility. And the 4th item is to really, in cooperation with Parks Canada, undertake a waterfront parks master plan. And a summary is really that this exercise, the first time it's been undertaken in Smiths Falls, and a master plan ideally should be updated every 5 years, certainly updated every 10 years if you don't get it around to it in that 5-year interval. And it should, and in this case is expected to guide the operational planning and suggestions that staff make to council around the investments required for parks and recreation through their annual business plans, budgets, and capital plans. So that's how you would expect to see this document used, is to guide some of those decisions, to provide some direction and some justification and rationale for some of the proposals that might come through the typical or normal business planning practices of the town of Smiths Falls. That concludes our presentation, and I pass it back to the chair.
All right, thanks a lot, Michael. So we'll open the floor up to questions. Councillor Alford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Michael. It is an exhaustive document, and myself, as we just received this, you've taken many months, you and our Community Services Department, to create this. And I am of the opinion that we will need a little bit longer than 4 or 5 days to provide meaningful comment on all that you've presented to us. So in the report on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, there was an option 2, which is to let council provide feedback to staff and the consultant, and after some time to process all the 75 pages.
Great, I'm seeing nodding heads for that. So looks like there's consensus for option 2. We'll do a round of comments. We've got Mayor Panko up next.
Thanks, Michael and Stephen. We've all been waiting for this presentation for quite a while, and so it's encouraging to see it finally make its way to committee whole. I guess I think we recognize how important our sports and recreation facilities are to the health of our community, and obviously to support the attraction of newcomers to our community. And I think there's the anticipation that we need to do more. And we looked at this as a guiding document. And so I see merit in all the recommendations and the thoughtfulness that was put into it. And I think it's very encouraging to have the amount of extensive public feedback that we have received. And I think it's going to help guide our decisions. But I guess a couple of questions. One relates to the utilization. And I'm wondering, I guess, the barriers to greater utilization, were they examined deeper? In other words, is cost a factor based on some of the challenging demographics, or some of the members of our community who might be challenged from a financial standpoint? Is transportation also a potential barrier for kids, especially kids, for getting access to organized sport? And then I recognize the need for secondary plan for areas like Highland Corbett. And of course, we had a public consultation up there, received some great feedback, which is formed here. And such a blank canvas for future redevelopment. But I'd hope for more for certain areas. In other words, recommendations for certain areas. And of course, you've got some here, but I'm looking for specific areas like Alexander Park, which is somewhat isolated up at the north end of town. And is there any, I didn't see anything in the report regarding Alexander, or the Park and Farmer Meadows on Lee Avenue, which is a small triangle of land which has been sitting underutilized. I'm wondering if there's recommendations for there. And to staff, I guess, will staff be doing further analysis on the costing of some of these recommendations, how they fit into our asset management plan, and how we connect them to our long-term financial plan?
Absolutely. This is meant as a guiding document. It provides kind of that general oversight in terms of what the priorities are, where some of the gaps might be in kind of creating those quality of life moments for people in the community, or people that are visiting our community or moving to our community. So this is that starting point, and all of those, like where we do have some momentum, where we've been involved with some of the park design pieces and taking a look at immediate priorities. Those are things that we're on the go with. We can think of this in terms of an extension of the sustainable service review that we did, where we're looking at all of those things in terms of affordability as an example, the balance between what we actually generate in revenue versus the actual cost for that service, and where that balance lies. And those are things that we're going to be looking at individually as we go forward. And the metrics piece that Michael was talking about in terms of who's using it, how they're using it, where they're using it, and where we do have some capacity, are all things that we build into our planning. And those planning pieces will be informed by the asset management plans as well as the Parks and Rec plan. And they will all come back to council as we go through and identify these, so that council can make effective decisions on it. The idea of this is to make sure that we're consistent in our approach, and where we do have opportunities, and Bellamy Farms was brought up a couple of times in this, and we have some capacity there, although we've, those plans and those development agreements have been in place for an extended period. So we do have some flexibility and some guidance from this document that we need to fit into a pre-existing agreement. So those are things that staff will then take and do and bring back to council for consideration along the way. But this is just to make sure that we're approaching it all from a consistent level, that we've got the basic criteria in terms of what the expectation is of the service and what it contributes to the community, and how council wants to approach that. And we'll bring recommendations forward in terms of the different kinds of approaches that we could take. An example is the field revenues have not changed in as far back as I can look in the budget. We generate between $10,000 and $12,000 a year renting the fields in. And as I said, it hasn't changed in, I guess, the 15 or so years that I've gone back and taken a look at that. So, the options there are we look at making that more organized, or we look at maybe removing the fees to remove those barriers and just have a better process to engage. And maybe that will leverage some of the sporting organizations to kind of kick up their plans around service delivery. So there's a lot of different options that this brings forward, and it just gives us some parameters that we can use to make decisions once we have those pieces brought forward.
Yeah, thanks, Art. And I think I can speak on behalf of all members of council that we're anxious to see much of this implemented really as quickly as possible. I know there's going to be a financial impact, and we're going to have to consider that financial impact. But we also made a commitment through this term strategic plan to make improvements in all parts in our town. And obviously we'd love to see the ability to follow through with that.
And now we have a more robust plan that we can use to base those decisions on. And so council will actually see some options in the capital budget once we have that discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of, I agree with the earlier suggestion that we do want to take a little more time to review the full document and have another discussion, but a couple of high level questions I had. I would like nothing better than to have a Smiths Falls Parks Canada master plan for what we're going to do. And that warms my heart, the thought of it. Practically though, does Parks Canada actually develop community specific plans, or their use of the canal runs from Kingston to Ottawa, and they have a set of policies and procedures that have to apply up and down the entire canal? And then I didn't see, or I'm not aware of any appetite to do something specifically with Smiths Falls, and nothing would make me happier. So I don't know the answer to that question. And then I have one others.
Director Manhire, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, the timing for this works very well. Parks Canada has developed an overall master plan for the canal system, and the secondary and tertiary parts of that plan are to develop individual plans for some spots along the canal system, and Smiths Falls will be part of that next plan. So we anticipate that coming down in the next couple of years, where they're looking at their assets in the town of Smiths Falls, and what our job is to try to align our priorities and their priorities so we come out with a much more usable space. And Parks Canada has been very good at involving us in that process. They've let us know that it's coming down the pipe, and so we've started putting our ducks in a row, if you'll excuse the expression, to be part of that conversation when it happens.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, just one more. And the other thing that warmed my heart in this is the use of data and the development of a broad range of data sets. My concern would be that if Smith Falls chooses a set of data and Brockville does a different set and Cornwall does a different set, and then we've got no peer group comparators. So I understand from my first couple of reads of it, it's focused on Smith Falls data and what's of interest to us, but without peer comparators, it's just us talking to ourselves again. So is that data set that you're referring to, is that a standardized set of common indicators and measures that we could get to peer review?
There are numbers in the field in terms of participation numbers.
I was asking the consultants. Sorry, Mr. Manhire, I should have directed that question through the chair to Michael or Stephen.
Sure. Through you, Chair. There is data for comparison purposes that might provide the kind of insights that I think you might be looking for. There are different organizations that AMO in particular provides a bit of insight about that for sort of comparison of multiple different municipal sectors within a municipality that is comparable data on a financial level. The data that is specifically, I think, going to come into play in Smith Falls is through the creation of new systems and practices and policies that will be surely informed by looking at how other municipalities apply said practices and the data that they collect through said practices. So that's in part, some of the practices Smith Falls use are quite dated, or there is no data available for some of those practices. So putting in place new practices, starting new policies where data is being collected, all of it informed by best practice policies out there, will provide a much richer data set to compare the outcomes of all of that over time with other municipalities that have been doing things those types of ways for a little while now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McKenna. Councillor Allen.
Yes, no, I agree with my colleagues. I'd like to spend more time. It's a very extensive document, but one of the things I had the pleasure of being in Mississippi Mills, I took part in a bike run on the weekend, and we went on the Ottawa Valley Recreation Trail. And the people there, it was a great event. The people there were talking about how wonderful it would be if their trail could connect to ours. The situation I understand is that CN has a small section of rail where it has rail cars being rented or stored. That's the only thing stopping that. And it's a real shame. And I don't know what we can do about it. Maybe there's nothing we can do about it. But the trails themselves and the kinds of activities and the events that we can have on the trails, and that would mean we would be merging from 3 sets of trails, which would be exciting, I think. The Railway Museum has often talked about being at that point where we could kind of, people could come there and depart from there, and we could really kind of be the trailhead or hub of those trails. Our cat trails used very, very well, but it's just a small section that we have. But it would be exciting to be part of this trail because it was 12 years ago when I was the principal in Mississippi Mills, the train ran through the town. And now they've taken that out, and what a transformation to the downtown and to the life of that little community. It's really made a big difference. But I need more time as well. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Director Manhire, I thought connecting those trails was in our strategic plan. Is that something we're working on right now?
It is. We've done a number of explorations, and Councillor Allen is correct that there seems to be kind of a gap of about a little bit less than a kilometer of track that does get in the way of that connection. But we have done some work in identifying landowners and access ways along that trail. So we are working on it, but it is going to be something that is going to require VIA or CN to be part of as well. So.
Thanks. Councillor Dwyer, I've lost your video feed. I don't know if you have any questions or comments. I'm guessing not. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I will reserve my comments until we have a more fruitful conversation in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great. Seeing Councillor Brennan, did you have anything for tonight or hold it till?
Yeah, ditto.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll give some comments then. I'll be honest, I did take the time to read it. I appreciate more time to look at it, but when I look back at what we were promised in February, alignment with the town strategic plan, a 10-year plan to guide planning and investment decisions, aspiration and pragmatism, and leveraging strengths, responding to growth and best practices. And so far what I'm seeing here is missing the mark. This is more of an aspirational white paper when I was expecting a blueprint. And we're going into budget conversations, looking to make a tangible improvement in all the parks in town. And this doesn't give me the information I need to make an educated decision on that. Certain aspects of it, like having the provision ratio on page 8, in the absence of any utilization data, it's all we've got, but it's not very meaningful. And I think when we knew that this plan was coming up, it's been on the books for a long, long time to have this Parks Master Plan done. The fact that we didn't collect any utilization data was a huge oversight because, in my opinion, without the utilization data, the recommendations on current facilities lack credibility because we don't know how much they're being used. I know anecdotally in the last 20 years, I've never driven through town and seen all the baseball diamonds used at the same time, but there's a recommendation to keep all 9 baseball diamonds. And it's just that kind of stuff that I think really takes away from the substance of this document. The trails inventory on page 13 is another one that it needs some work because the Rideau Trail goes from Ottawa to Kingston, not Smith Falls to Perth. The Smith Falls ATV Trail connects with the Ottawa Valley Recreational Trail, and the Ottawa Valley Recreational Trail goes from Smith Falls to Mattawa. So there's just some sloppiness in there that I think needs to be tightened up before we get this back. And similarly, there's Smith Falls is spelled without the S in places. There's some markups in the PDF. So I guess just, and the last thing is I was really hoping for some imagination in this, where if you ask people what they want, they're going to tell you what they know. So they want, more of the same. But when I read this, when you read our downtown waterfront and downtown revitalization and waterfront plan, it's really inspiring. It's a big part of why I ran for council, and I don't get that out of this document. So I'm hoping that we can really add something to it before we support this, because all I see coming out of this is more planning, and more planning means more time, and it means more continued decline of our parks. So I've been impressed with the consultation and everything, and I'm just giving my honest feedback on that. So I appreciate your time tonight. Is there any last questions, comments before we? Okay, not seeing any, then so we'll table that for a future committee of the whole to come back. Deputy Clerk Bennett, do you have something there? Okay, so we'll go with option 2 in the staff report. My understanding is that the in-camera process is working again. Is that correct, Deputy Clerk Bennett? So if we could move in camera, we could take care of the committee appointment that we were hoping to earlier in the meeting. Do we have to do another motion, or?
If you don't mind, for the time, if we could do another motion, please.
Moved by Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor Brennan to go in camera. All those in favor? It's great. So the motion's carried. So we'll move into our breakout room. Please stay tuned.
I'm just moving everyone out that should be out. Okay, he's just closing our room, so we'll be back in a second. Okay, we should be all back now, Chair McGuire.
Okay, great. And we're still streaming.
He's got us going now. Yep, we're good.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So the resident report is that we will add item 8.9 to the agenda tonight to add 3 new members to the Downtown Business Association. With that, we'll move on to item 8.2, CIP application for funding for 36 Maple with our senior planner, Carl Grinke. Take it away, Mr. Grinke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'll keep this one quite brief. This evening, we're looking at a Program 3 application under the Community Improvement Plan for a building and planning rebate for a new stacked triplex on Maple Avenue. The civic address is 36 Maple. It is a vacant. It's a vacant lot, and the owners Matthew and Teagan Mackey proposed to construct a stacked triplex there. There have been previous development proposals on this lot, and some of which have attracted a considerable amount of public interest. However, those development proposals never went forward, and the current owners have purchased the lot and have obtained a minor variance approval for the principle of development. So the program 3 allows a rebate of up to 75% of eligible site plan and building permit fees. This was reviewed by the Community Improvement Plan Evaluation Committee earlier this year. And while they didn't object to the application in principle, they wanted to have the Planning Advisory Committee have a look at the design, with the PAC, of course, having a design review mandate as a site plan through the site plan process. So in this case, the Planning Advisory Committee did look at the site plan and generally and supported it in principle. Once we've received some final engineering information earlier actually last month, then we were ready to grant CIP. We're ready to grant site plan approval, and accordingly the CIP evaluation committee had another look and endorsed a total of $5,516.71 in planning and building permit rebate to this application. So if this is supported by council, then we'll enter into a funding agreement, and those fees would be rebated around over the course of the building process. In this case, the CIP committee, when they looked at the application, they identified that there wasn't public opposition to this particular proposal, and also that the CIP broadly supports multi-residential development and different densities of housing, sort of in the shoulder areas of our downtown core, and this particular street is within the CIP project area. So at this point, staff are bringing forward a funding recommendation from the CIP committee, and the committee and staff seek council's direction. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Granke. This is what I think is a great use for the program 3. With nodding heads, we can put that on the agenda for our next meeting of council. Great, thank you very much, Carol. Have a good rest of your evening. Now we'll move on to 8.3, September Budget Monitoring Report with Treasurer Quazile.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here this evening to provide a high-level update after completing September's budget monitoring. As indicated in my report, we're still trending an overall surplus. It went up slightly from $668,000 in August to $686,000. The majority of that is in the tax-supported budget of about $558,000. These interim reports are provided to council and senior staff to ensure accountability and adherence to our approved budget. I would like to reiterate that I do take a conservative approach when I forecast or project these surpluses. So just something to keep in mind. So if you had any questions.
Treasurer Kozio, I really appreciate these reports to keep us on top of stuff. Councillor Alford, you had a question.
Not a question, just I do love the sound of surplus. So thanks once again.
Yeah, it's a great snapshot of where we're at. Mayor Panko?
Yes, thank you. Janet, is any of the surplus a result of any deferred capital items, or is it more a matter of operational savings and grants that we were anticipating?
Through the chair, it is through the operational. There's no surpluses projected for capital. Anything will just remain in the reserves and to that end. The majority of it is payroll, as well as shared services. That we had a reconciliation from 2020 year end that helped to offset the two one-time capital projects that we had earmarked in 2021.
Thank you.
Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me, Janet, can we talk a little bit about the localized deficit in revenue coming from ICE rentals? I know that at the beginning of the year with lockdown and closure, there was not a lot of rental on facilities, and the operational costs of the arena were still there. Is that anticipated to be offset by revenue that's coming in for the second part of the year, the kind of half season that we're going to have between September and year end? Or is that something that we anticipate will continue to run in deficit to the end of the year?
So through the chair, I used 2019 as my marker for what sort of we could project from November to the end of the year. And the deficit is landing in and around the 285,000. I did carry over COVID funding from last year, which we were allowed to do, reported on that in June of this year, anticipating this would occur, that the majority of it would be used in that. So if you look at the variance report, you're going to see a debit, you'll see an offsetting credit in that same amount coming from that COVID funding.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Janet.
Thanks, Councillor Dwyer. Seeing no further questions or comments, we'll accept your report for our information and move on to 8.4 2022 budget guidelines.
Sorry, I apologize in advance. I got a tickle all of a sudden. So starting with the 2022 budget, in August, staff commenced with the process of preparing the draft budget. It has been assembled based on existing levels of service delivered by the town with the guidance from the long-term financial sustainability plan. The capital items have been drawn from our comprehensive asset management as well as the current strategic plan. I just wanted to reiterate to council that to date there has been 1.6 million of the tax supported capital reserve pre-approved for the 2022 capital budget. The preliminary budget, as per my report, the schedule will be presented to committee on November 22nd. At that time, council will also establish a budget allotment for our municipal grants and donations. Over the past few years, that has been approximately 1% of our taxation revenue. This year, that would equate to around 150,000. So the deadlines for these applications is November 30th. Staff will evaluate and bring forward the recommendations to the committee on December 13th when the second draft is presented. The final draft will be presented to committee on January 17th. And our ultimate goal, directed by our budget policy, is to have it approved by the budget approved by the end of January. With this proposed budget schedule, we are confident that we can achieve that objective. So as a starting point for these discussions, I would like to recap the rate increases that were contained within the 2021 budget. So it was 1.1%, which was based on the 2020 CPI. That was till the end of October. It did kind of come in a little bit higher at 1.2. So it is important to note that these increases did deviate from the projected increases in the long-term plans. The water rates are projected at 5.5 annually, wastewater at 3.5, and tax rate increase at 3.38. So at this early juncture, there are still some unknown factors. The OSIF formula-based funding is still not been confirmed. Our 2021 allotment was 605,000. And I have reached out, but I cannot get any confirmation on even on a time frame for that. County shared services, the 2022 budget figures are still unknown. I did reach out to staff and I anticipate receiving that one day this week. So that will be on the first draft. As noted earlier, there were 2 one-time capital projects in 2021. I have not received any kind of confirmation that this one will have anything along those lines, so I can't really confirm that. The 2022 assessment roll, we don't typically get that till the first week in December. As noted in previous reports, MPAC updates property values annually through the phase-in assessment of 4-year cycle. This ended in 2020. The status quo assessment will be carried forward into 2022 due to the pandemic. At this point in time, the province has not announced the starting date that the next 4-year cycle will be evaluated on, or when they anticipate this 4-year cycle to begin. Preliminary calculations suggest that additional taxation revenue from new construction and growth will be higher than the 1% projected in our long-term plan. It'll be just slightly shy of 2% from our first look at the numbers, approximate increased in revenue about 280,000. The other thing that was on my report, the OMPF, which Malcolm had alluded to earlier, that we did receive confirmation after my report went out, so it will remain at the 3.586. So prior to presenting the first draft, again, tentatively scheduled for November 22nd, staff are seeking direction from council with respect to preliminary expectations, and which would ultimately be based on outcomes that council wishes to achieve in the next fiscal year. So the options in my report were to develop a draft budget based on our approved long-term plan, which the increases were noted earlier. Option 2, develop a draft budget anchored on status quo service levels and using the cost of living as the guidance. At the time of my report, that was to the end of August, the cost of living average for 2021 was 3.6. September's has since come in at 5.3. So the last 3 or 4 months have come in closing in on the 5%, 4.8, 4.7, and September's was 5.3. So that does increase the overall average to 3.8. And then the third is to develop a budget based on service levels adjustment as directed by council. And finally, the other staff also require direction from council on potential further public engagement, tentatively scheduled in my report for December 1st. And there were some options in there for council's consideration. And with that, if you had any questions or.
Thank you, Councillor Kozil. Councillor Brennan, then Councillor McKenna.
Thanks, Janet. And it's so nice to get an early start on this. And in my experience, it's not always been the case. So it's nice to have some benchmarks, some timelines and that sort of thing. In terms of the options for public engagement, I would say every one of them would be helpful in a sort of a tiered approach, maybe timed and that sort of thing. And I think the schedule for the budget is great, as I said. In terms of options, we're in sort of a anomaly situation with the inflation right now, as we know. It might be temporary, it might not be, but my preference would be for staff to look at the guidelines that we used last year as far as the mill rate and the water and wastewater. People are stretched, as we know, and I know we're facing the inflation, but everyone else is too. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, to tighten our belts. I think there's places we could do that. We had a request tonight from the hospital for a contribution, and I think that should be considered very strongly. And if there's other places where we can find some money, I think that we need to do that and keep affordability at top of mind for our taxpayers. But thanks for the report, and I look forward to discussions in the future.
Thanks, Councillor Brennan. We've got Councillor McKenna, Mayor Banco, then Councillor Dwyer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you to Janet. Just thinking about that, the impact, I think Councillor Brennan is right. We aren't sure about where that inflation rate's going to stay or for how long. I don't see in the medium term it changing. When we get further into the discussion, or perhaps at the November 22nd preliminary budget, will you be able to, if you looked at a 5% increase for fuel and other services, will you factor that in, like the increased cost because of inflation, and give us an idea what the impact that will be?
Through the chair, that we do look at that. To be honest, we are still working sort of on some of the last few subdepartmental budgets, so we are still working on that.
Yeah, that will be an important piece of information. Thank you.
Councillor McKenna, we've got Mayor Panko.
Thanks, Janet, and my comments tend to mirror Councillor Brennan's comments. And inflation is a real concern. I think it's going to be a concern that will not be leaving us anytime soon, and that has had a significant impact on our citizens and our taxpayers. And even though we talk about this every year, the ability to pay is always a challenge. So, and I respect the reality that we've got a long-term financial plan, and that we have committed to that financial plan, but we've always tended to bring in a tax increase below the rate of inflation. I think over the last 6 or 7 years, maybe 8 years, which may not reflect the financial plan, but there's other factors like growth, which I think the growth anticipated in the financial plan is lower than the growth we realized. So Janet, a question related to reserves, because I think our financial plan is designed obviously to build up reserves to meet our capital needs. Where are we today? I don't know if you have it at your fingertips in relationship to based on the 2022 forecasted budget, which you've seen, based on the numbers you've got here at the end of 2022, and that's also based on the expenditures that are planned. It might be too much to ask right now. Would we still be on track for our capital reserve balances at year end?
Unfortunately, I can't really state. That is my goal, to keep that within line. We have in the past had it actually exceed that. Yes. Our pre-budget approval for Beckwith kind of took some of that surplus that we were getting ahead in the tax support, which thankfully was there. We were able to fund that successfully. But as far as that is my ultimate goal, to keep that in line with the long-term plan.
Okay, well, that's a fine answer for tonight. Thank you. So overall, I would align my recommendation with Councillor Brandon's, that being something similar to last year, to 2021 budget.
Thanks, Mayor Panko. Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like looking in a crystal ball, hoping to know what's coming down the pipes with the inflation rate. But I think the reality is that what we've seen in our budget reviews the last couple of years is that we're operating a fairly lean service anyways. And unless we're going to start compromising our priorities for long-term financial management, like maintaining our reserve contributions year over year, I think the reality is that we're going to end up talking about service cuts this year, unless we actually meet the cost of inflation. I can appreciate that taxpayers are feeling the inflation rate. It cost me almost twice what it normally does to fill my van at the pumps today, which came with some sticker shock. But the reality is that those same inflation rates are going to be affecting the municipality, particularly on our capital works. So I don't want to see us under project what our rate needs are going to be to cover off standard operating services and capital works that have been planned. So I say stick with the inflation rate as projected, and hopefully it decreases in the next couple of months and we can adjust accordingly. But I think otherwise we're talking about service cuts, and I don't think that's something that we have really assessed to date, and I don't even know where to start with that. So I mean, maybe that's something that staff could come back to us with if the consensus by council is that we are not going to look at matching the CPI. To me, that's really the only way to go. I'd hate to see us start cutting capital or compromising kind of our long-term financial health through minimizing our contributions to reserves. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dwyer. We have Councillor Alford up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm somewhere between Councillor Brennan and Councillor Dwyer in this. Jen, I do have one question with regard to the long-term financial sustainability plan and wastewater financial plan that says water rate increase 5.5, wastewater 3.5, tax rate 3.38. When that long-term financial sustainable plan was put together, did we know what our growth would be and what could our expected growth decrease the current suggestions that we should be charging?
Through the chair, it was a status, it was very minimal. It was 1% projected growth across the board. It didn't increase over the course of the plan. As I say, this one I believe is around 1.9. It is very preliminary. We won't know those exact figures until the first week of December, but so we are, and I think part of it, the pandemic caused some of our supplemental residential to come forward because they were unable to do the assessment, the on-site. So I think this year we may see some of the impact of that from last year not receiving it. So that could account for part of it.
Yeah, this year may be particularly difficult to decide where council should land with tax increases, given the pressures on the municipality, and acknowledging and being empathetic to the pressures on our constituents. So yeah, I think you will, I think staff, I think our treasurer will bring back something as reasonable as possible in terms of a tax increase. And then it'll be up to council to decide if we go lower.
Treasurer Quazio.
Sorry, so what I did last year, we came in with status quo, no increases on the first draft, and then provided different scenarios. From what I'm understanding, you'd like to see the 2021, which was 1.1 as one of the particular scenarios. And then I could show what the long-term plan projects, and then I could show what CPI is as we know it going into the first draft. So if you're receptive to that, I could prepare that and bring that.
I think that is probably the best way to go. And I certainly would appreciate seeing what our options are. As far as public consultation, I'll make that comment now. Again, I think all of it could be done. And certainly it would be nice to be able to have a coffee with council open house and have those informal discussions. And hopefully with our vaccine policy to be delivered tonight, we could ensure that everybody is double vaccinated so that we could maybe carry that one off too. It'd be nice to see people in person again.
Councillor Alfred. CEO Morris, did you have a comment there?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Treasurer Cozio kind of read my mind, so she I think outlined suggested approach in terms of bringing back options. But I would just like to provide comment. It's a very unique position we're in with inflation being so abnormally high. But I would like to just offer that you know, there are certain things that were mentioned. Certainly capital projects are going to feel the impact of inflationary increases. Our energy consumption is going to feel the impact. Our insurance rates are certainly going in an upward direction. But on the other hand, there are certain costs that won't be as directly affected by inflation. A significantly large part of our budget are salaries and wages, and we've locked those in for 2022, so we know exactly what they're going to be. So so I think, you know, once we kind of put everything in the blender and it comes out the other end, we'll have a better idea of what the overall impact is, or the balanced impact. So I think once we go through that exercise, we'll have a better sense of where we are between 1.1% and 5.3% inflation. I would just like to caution 1.1 is going to be a challenge with some of the pressures we're facing. So I just wanted to state that early in the process. Thank you.
Thanks, CEO Morris. I don't see any other hands up, so I'll give my comments. I agree with you, CEO Morris, on the 1.1. I think that was artificially low with last year's COVID numbers, and something around 2%, I think would be more representative of the average of the last 5 years. With the inflationary pressure, I share Councillor Dwyer's sentiments that I really committed to that, where it's, we said we're going to follow this. And what bothers me right now is that the province is continuing to delay the impact assessments. And in Smith Falls right now, there could be 2 houses that are worth $400,000 if they hit the market. And one house is paying $1,000 in taxes, and the other house could be paying who knows how much, $4,000 or $5,000. And when there's that kind of inequality in the tax base, I think that's why we have to show some restraint this year and make an exception to following the inflation rate, because, or the cost of living increase, because just with that kind of inequality, it's not fair. And until impact starts adjusting those values and getting our tax base in line with the reality of what current market rates are, we're in an awkward position. So I think the consensus seems clear to come back with some options. When it comes to public engagement, the only, I'd much prefer a coffee with council instead of an open house. I think but the virtual open houses have been really well attended compared to the in-person ones. So, so maybe we do both. One thing though is with putting an insert in the utility bills is great, but I get mine through email. So if we could have an option for those people, because sometimes I miss out on that stuff because it doesn't come through, and I'm sure there's other people in that boat. Janet, do you have enough of what you need from us tonight to?
Well, the options were meant to be that options, not all of the above. So there is time obviously to do all of the above. So my preference would be to pick one. Again, coffee with culture would be the optimal one to do. Whether we'll be at that stage where we can have an open house in person, I'm not certain of that. The virtual open house we did last year, perhaps, I think we had some feedback, which was good that we were able to address those at that particular meeting. Those are my thoughts. But
okay, so do we need to decide between a virtual open house or a coffee with council? Councillor Allen?
Yeah, I certainly would prefer coffee with council. I think, it's just easier, and I think it's more meaningful to be with people rather than virtual. Hopefully we won't have to worry about that by then.
Councillor Brennan?
I would prefer a coffee with council virtually, where people could actually participate and we could interact just like we're interacting right now. It's easier for them to do. And as we know, the participation or the viewing of our meetings, we're talking right now, is normally in the hundreds. So I think that would be the optimal thing.
Okay, so we've got one coffee with council, one virtual open house. Councillor Alford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I think there's the potential to do both, have the virtual open house, and many people don't wish to speak in public on a Zoom platform. So I think we could probably do both, do the virtual open house information session, and then later on in the process have a coffee with council where you can perhaps have more in-person interaction. Certainly prior to COVID, our open house with council there and staff was abysmally attended. And so the virtual seems to have engendered more people to participate. I think we could make room for both of those.
So we've got one vote for everything. Does anybody else want to weigh in here? Banco?
Okay, could we do both actually the same evening? I think there's a method of us meeting with people and then potentially flipping over to a virtual format or vice versa within the same time frame if at all possible. But I'll leave that to staff to see if that technically could be put together. But I like the idea of being more inclusive than possible than not. And to Wendy's comment, we host an open house type of forum, and we may not get a lot of people, but then again, we have a lot of people who may not be very comfortable with Zoom. So I'd prefer we do what we can to connect with as many people as possible.
Treasurer Quazio?
I was just concerned with, we're still set with virtual committee of the whole and council. So can we do a meeting? I don't know where we're at with timing on having in-person meetings. My suggestion may, with December 1st, not really that far away, we do the virtual open house, and perhaps in January when things do kind of recede a bit, hopefully, that the in-person could then take place. That's just a thought.
Great. So everybody's okay with that recommendation? Nodding heads. So we'll start with a virtual open house, and hopefully we can do a copy in the new year. All right. Is that clear enough direction for the option 1, 2, or 3 as well, with the something with the options of different rate increases, I guess?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's good to start having these conversations, and look forward to round 2. So next up, we've got Director McMahon with amendments to the parking bylaw report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just audio check. You can hear me okay?
Great.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, so a couple of recommendations coming out of this evening's report from Public Works and Utilities. One is with respect to some additions to Schedule B in our parking bylaw. And then the other is with respect to the designation of a new community safety zone within the community. It's important to note that we quite regularly get observations from residents within the community with respect to some of the challenges that they have with parking on their street, or just access and egress from different areas of the town via our road networks. So we do receive those concerns or complaints, if you will, or observations from residents, as well as we do get feedback from the Smith Falls Police Service as well. And lastly, or not lastly, sorry, but also from our Public Works Department operations staff. And then lastly would be from the Transportation Advisory Committee. So all of the recommendations that you're seeing here this evening within this report have been vetted through TAC, the Transportation Advisory Committee, and they do support the recommendations here this evening. So with respect to Schedule B, that is respect to no parking anytime. So there are 4 streets, Mary Street South, Ross Street, George Street North, and 10th Street, that are seeing some proposed bylaw amendments. And then the second point of the report is with respect to amendments to Schedule G, which is restricted parking miscellaneous. So what that means is for a certain period of time, or certain months, if you will, within the bylaw. So that is primarily regarding winter control operations and some of the challenges our operations staff have while trying to either remove snow from streets or just perform winter control operations in general. And then the last one is with respect to the community safety zone that's being proposed over on Chambers Street from Elmslie Street South to Running Avenue. So that would be in addition to the community safety zones that we currently have within the community. The application has been recommended due to increased volume of children in the area that are heading to and from school, accessing Duncan J. Scholar Elementary School. And also of note is the recorded speed throughout the area. So staff have conducted traffic speed counts July of 2021 in the area and confirmed that there is a speeding issue in the area. So that particular stretch of road is posted at 40 kilometers an hour, and the 85th percentile that was recorded through our traffic counts was at 49.4. So the 85th percentile is kind of the metric that we use to inform decisions for proposed changes that we're bringing in front of council for consideration. So the addition of a community safety zone would hopefully address some of the speed concerns in that area. And I'm sure you're all aware of what a community safety zone means. It's basically a doubling of the fines within that particular prescribed area for anybody that's in contravention of the Highway Traffic Act. So a couple of options for this evening would be to amend the bylaw as recommended in this report, and or approve portions of the report this evening, the recommendations. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions through the chair.
Thank you, Director McMahon. We have Councillor Alford up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think we've had one of these at our council before. I support the addition of the community safety zone. We fairly recently lost a community safety zone for St. Francis School, so this kind of trades that, and there are children involved. In terms of process, Mr. McMahon, because I don't watch all the traffic advisory committees or anything. When you say, like, for instance, Mary Street, complaints have been received and reviewed, like how many complaints are we talking about here?
Yeah, so through the chair, so Councillor Alford, good question. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to check with, a lot of this predates my time here, but I guess there would have to be enough complaints to warrant for Vanessa Bernicki, or engineering technologist, to take it in front of TAC in the first place. So there would have been documented complaints from residents, and specifically from Mary Street South. It involves parked vehicles on both sides of Mary Street South, and we know that we do have bus drop off over in that particular area. And what's happening is the parents are parking in that general localized area, and it's making it very difficult, especially when the buses are there, for instance, with people maneuvering and getting around and accessing the street and getting off the street, so on and so forth. It's specifically right there, we're looking at a restriction on Mary Street South, 15 meters south of Chambers Street. So we're not asking for a restriction of parking for the whole street. It's just that isolated area where the geometry and people moving in vehicles, it's
Well, certainly I respect Ms. Bernicki's work. We've had a chance to work with her for 3 years. I'm just curious about the process, and if this is more than just a recommendation from traffic advisory. It's also staff have agreed with the conclusion of the committee. So no, I'm more curious about the process, because I don't believe we've seen one of these before since we've been on council.
okay, interesting. Yeah, my experience is this is, I wouldn't say an everyday occurrence, but it's generally quite regular as as demographics change within the community, and increase of pedestrian traffic, and people finding different modes of travel around the community. It's kind of a living document, if you will, the parking bylaw. But that being said, yeah, I would have to wager a guess, Councillor Alford, that staff are definitely doing their due diligence and they're looking at this. It wouldn't be poised on one call, a complaint from a resident. It would be a culmination of concerns that have come down the pipe, and that would have been presented to TAC, and for them to support this.
Thank you. Well, and my preference is always to support the committee's recommendation. It doesn't always happen, but that's my preference. So I will be supporting staff's recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Alford. Just to clarify, we've got a transportation advisory committee, not a traffic advisory committee.
Excuse me, it's a habit I have not broken yet. Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Yes, yeah, I'm very happy to support the staff recommendation. I've been part of a group that work at Chimo School, and I've been working with the drug strategy with Aaron Tompkins, our community officer. And I know for a fact, because we've walked along there and watched and counted, there are many, many children walking in that area, and the people do drive fast on that. For some reason, it seems like it's just a wide open street that they zoom by, and you know what children are like when they're walking. They're not paying attention to whether they're on the sidewalk or on the road. So I think that safety zone is a really important one to add. I'm glad we're doing that.
Thanks, Councillor Allen. We've got Councillor Brennan, then Mayor Penko.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to couch this. I'm going to say I am part of the Transportation Advisory Committee. And this item, I think, came up we had a presentation from on the active transportation plan, and I had to leave the meeting to go to that to a planning meeting. Sorry, which subsequently got canceled because of technical issues. But I did miss the end of and I missed this particular part. I am certainly supportive of the community safety zone. I am also supportive of the additions to Schedule B, which are really small pieces. The Lyra Street one or Ross Street one is larger, but there's nobody really living on there. So I do have a few concerns about the Schedule G, the Ogden and Aberdeen pieces. They are longer stretches. In fact, they're blocks long. So what my concern is, no parking any time, is they're full of houses. And does that mean that someone has a visitor come over, or i.e. maybe even a nurse to come and visit? They can't park in front of the house?
Yes, through the chair, if I could. Yes, that's exactly what that would mean, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, so I would have a problem with those two there. We do have winter parking regulations that come into effect next week, I think, and that's overnight. And so to do 24 hours a day on those two stretches, in my view, is a little bit heavy duty in terms of people's access and having people stop by the house or whatever. You can't park in front of the house in the middle of the day on a bright sunny day. I'm not sure about that.
Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, so in conversations with operations staff and public works and the roads division, I'll call it, the challenge is even just for general maintenance, winter control maintenance on those streets, just because of the width of the road and parking is permissible on either side currently. So I'm just wondering if there'd be an appetite for this parking provision restriction through winter months to be one side or the other as a compromise.
That, through the chair, that would be a fair compromise in my view.
Great. I think I see nodding heads for that. Any objections? So there's consensus for that change. Mayor Panko?
Yeah, Director McMahon or I guess Director Costello, how do we proceed from here when it comes to changing behavior and enforcement? I assume obviously signage will be in place. Do we immediately step in and start laying fines day one? Do we provide bylaw services there to help inform people that they're now parked in what is previously or what is now a no parking zone and things like that? So just wondering that path forward.
Director Costello?
Definitely, as with most new bylaws, Mayor Panko, we would do, some warnings or a bit of an educational campaign at the beginning. We'd have to ensure that the proper signage was in place. We can also use our website and social media outlets to try to get some of these changes out. But for the most part, we would do a softer approach for enforcement at the beginning, just so people are aware of the changes.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Great. So I think you've got your direction, Director McMahon. We'll take option one with Councillor Brennan's amendments and look forward to seeing this at a future council meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to 8.6 COVID-19 vaccination policy with Director Costello.
Thank you. The draft proposal or draft policy was circulated to all of you last week for your review. The purpose of this policy is to mandate all existing and future elected officials, employees, members of our committees and boards
as well as people using office space within the complex and contractors to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 or have an exemption as outlined by the province of Ontario. As you can imagine, this policy has been vetted through numerous people. It's been vetted through the town's Joint Health and Safety Committee, as well as our Emergency Control Group, senior management, legal, and it was sent out to all of staff last week for their review as well. So providing proof of full vaccination would be a condition of employment for all future hires effective December 31st. And will be a condition of employment to all current employees if council passes this policy or adopts this policy. This policy comes forward to all of you through the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the regulations that require employers to do everything reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of the worker. So that's the crux of this policy coming forward to all of you this evening. I wanted to, there's in summation of the policy, the two basic premises that it comes down to would be that any applicable party, and the applicable parties would be the groups that I just listed, who is not able to obtain a COVID vaccination for reason related to a protected ground under the Ontario Human Rights Code or with an approved medical exemption can request accommodation. Of course, we cannot accommodate all requests, or we cannot guarantee accommodation to all of the requests. If the accommodation can be provided, the town would require regular screening and testing 3 times per week, and they'd have to comply with all safety measures currently in place. On the flip side of that, any applicable party without an approved accommodation plan and not fully vaccinated against COVID-19 would be required to be fully vaccinated by December 31st. They would be required to complete a mandatory education course. They would be required as well to undergo testing at their expense. If they are still not fully vaccinated by December 31st, they may request a leave as per the town's employment bylaw. If no leave is requested or all the leaves have exhausted, the party's employment will be considered terminated. As outlined in the report, there are some considerations for council. Obviously, the vaccine does not totally eliminate the risk and transmission of COVID. There is a potential of staffing implications if this policy is passed. Currently, within our area, we're above 90% for our vaccination rate, which is something for council to look into as well. I've outlined some options for council to consider. They can adopt the policy as drafted, which would apply again to all elected officials, committee board members, as well as employees, people using office space within the complex, as well as contractors. If council wants, they could amend the policy as they deem fit. They can leave it as status quo where no policy would be adopted. Or they can adopt a vaccination policy, which would provide that all unvaccinated individuals to provide 3 weekly rapid testing. It is recommended that if this is the route council wishes to go, that the rapid testing for those with the human rights exemption would be covered by the town, but the cost for testing for those without an exemption would be paid for by the respective employees. So happy to take any questions you may have. I'm assuming that everybody reviewed the document before this evening's meeting. So happy to take any questions or comments you may have.
Thanks, Director Costello. We've got Councillor Dwyer, then Alfred, then Mayor Franco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is such a hard discussion to have, and it's one that so many local municipalities are having right now. Carrie, I want to thank you for taking the time to draft the report and the policy, which is quite different than that which has been adopted by some of the other local municipalities. Excuse me. I think as much as I myself am personally in favor of high vaccination rates and any person who is eligible to get a vaccine, I feel that I have to acknowledge that it is to some degree a personal choice, and whether or not someone has a medical exception specifically for which the grounds are extremely limited, I think that there are certain cases in which an exception for compassionate grounds should be evaluated. And so to that end, perhaps, Carrie, you can just clarify the last point that you raised in the discussion. Am I to understand that if an employee is not medically exempt from COVID, but is electing not to get vaccinated, they may still be eligible for an accommodation to be assessed by someone on staff, provided that they undertake regular testing at the intervals prescribed at their own expense?
No, so if somebody does not have an exemption and they don't have any exemption, whether it be a medical exemption or that another listed in the Ontario Human Rights Code, they could take any leaves as per the town's employment bylaw, but once those leaves are exhausted, or if no leave fits the need of that person, that their employment would be considered terminated.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I have a really hard time with that. I think that in certain circumstances, there are additional considerations that have to be given. Not to say that every individual's hesitancy to become vaccinated should be grounds to eliminate the potential for an accommodation, but I would like to see our policy recognize opportunities for assessment on a case-by-case basis. I'm a little unclear reading the policy who ultimately becomes responsible for its administration. My sense would be that it would be the CAO, but I don't believe it expressly states that. So I'd like to see some further detail added to who is ultimately responsible for the enforcement of the policy, and where that responsibility lies, and if there is any appetite from council to consider further exemptions. Perhaps it's something that we should consider laying out additional policy for, or if we have a level of comfort with the CAO simply making a judgment call on a case-by-case basis, I would be agreeable to that. So those are my comments. I will say that in the past week, I have heard from a number of our staff members who are not vaccinated and have no intention of becoming vaccinated. So I do worry about what the potential staffing liability on this is going to be, particularly for some of the positions within the organization that are quite challenging to fill. So I think it's something that we should be cognizant of and assess on an as needed basis, case by case, at the judgment of the CAO. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dwyer. So just for my understanding, is that a vote for option 3, adopt the policy with a rapid antigen testing, or is it a hybrid that you're advocating for?
Mr. Chair, I would suggest it's a hybrid, but perhaps Carrie could articulate whether or not it fits neatly within option 3 or not.
So option 3 is adopt a COVID-19 vaccination policy, which would provide for all unvaccinated individuals to provide 3 weekly rapid antigen testing. It is recommended that if this is the route that council wishes to go, that the cost of the testing for those with a human rights exemption would be covered by the town, but the cost of the testing for those without an exemption would be paid by the employee.
Looking for me to clarify?
Director Costello?
Just read it. I would say that what Councillor Dwyer is saying would qualify under number 3 of the recommendations.
So that's a vote for number 3, Councillor Dwyer. Okay. Councillor Alford.
Yeah, I echo Councillor Dwyer's dismay with having to deal with this. We don't currently, no municipality that I'm aware of has policy for vaccinations for measles or mumps or the 15 other vaccines we've all had as children, and yet this hesitancy with regard to not just COVID, but other vaccines is going to play out now for us at the municipal level. And it's not a position that I think any of us want to be in. But that being said, 93% of the population, I'm going to use the LGLs, that would be speaking to what's happening in Smiths Falls. 93% of the people in Smiths Falls have chosen to get vaccinated. And so in so doing so, they are in fact protecting the 3%, or sorry, the 6% that have some vaccine hesitancy. So I struggle with that. I also not, it's upsetting to have to force people to get a vaccine to keep their jobs. That's just nothing that we have pre-pandemic anywhere had to face. So I am struggling with this one. I don't know that I'm ready to cast a vote for it, Mr. Chair, because we have some valuable staff, contractors that I would be, who are vaccine hesitant, volunteers that I would not want to lose, but potentially we could, and that has an impact, a negative impact on our municipality as well. So all that being said, I think I could live more easily with option 3. But again, we haven't put that to a vote yet. So I'm gonna process what all my colleagues think and then see if I can land on a better one. For now, I will tentatively support 3.
Thanks, Councillor Alford. We've got Mayor Panko, then Councillor Brennan, then Councillor McKenna.
Thank you. This is really, really gut-wrenching. We are basically making decisions that could have a profound impact on people's livelihood and their future career. At the same time, we're trying to balance that with protecting the lives of the people that work for the municipality. And I think obviously this is none of us want to deal with, but we know we have to. I read a great article on the weekend in the Financial Post, written by an employment labor lawyer, and it delved deeply into the legal authority of an employer to mandate a vaccination policy and the employer's right to terminate an employee when if he or she does not comply. And in an ideal world, we would not have any employees who are in that situation, but we do. As we know, there are very few legitimate medical reasons, exemptions, that an individual could use to refuse a vaccine. And there's really no other legitimate reasons why someone could refuse. Hesitancy under law is not sufficient reason to refuse a vaccine. And I guess as much as we've been somewhat insulated from the impact of COVID, we've all dealt with it. It's been around us, but we have not seen the loss of life. We have not seen the ICU admissions that we've experienced elsewhere in Canada right now, and of course elsewhere in the world. But we know that it's crippled our economy. It's impacted our workforce, but it has killed 5 million people worldwide and rendered many more those long haulers permanently incapacitated. And as an employer, we have as indicated in the report, we have a responsibility to protect our staff. The Occupational Health and Safety Act requires that we do all we can to protect our staff. The Ontario Emergency Management Civil Protection Act provides fines of $10 million or a year in jail. Employer is reckless with employees' health during COVID-19. And to Councillor Alford's point, we've got 93, 94, 95% people in this region vaccinated. I think we're probably 97% double vax within the next couple of weeks. We're talking about a handful of people. These are people we know, people we care about, and people that we wish were vaccinated, we wish would get the vaccine, but obviously they have to find their own path to that. I hope anyone who's not vaccinated would speak to a doctor, go down and go to Emerge and talk one-on-one with Dr. Horsey, one of the other doctors there, and share your concerns and thoughts and help you understand if that is rational or not. Bringing in a policy is doing the right thing. But then on Friday, of course, we hear Premier Ford's comments that he anticipates the lifting of the mandatory vaccine passport model by the end of March. So I think it gives us reason to pause and possibly re-examine the policy. Does it make sense to potentially terminate people December 31st when the need for a policy may no longer exist beyond the end of March? If we knew today that 3 months after that policy was fully in place, the province would definitely lift the need for the measure, would we reconsider the rigidness with which we could potentially enforce it? Would we find a method, as has been suggested, frequent mandatory testing at an employee's cost, or working from home accommodation, or even leave without pay until a policy is no longer needed? Well, we know we live in a world with a lot of uncertainty. We know less than half the world is fully vaccinated at this stage. We know that variants could rise again. And we can't be sure we'll be rid of this by the end of March. So I'm leaning towards option 3 as well. But I would like to, again, I think to Councillor Alford's point, I'd like to hear from the rest of my colleagues and see how that impacts my train of thought here.
Thanks, Mayor Franco. Councillor Brennan.
Yeah, I mean, after the last 11 years, I'd never imagined I'm talking about this stuff, and it's really difficult. And a couple of things. One is, and I thank you, Carrie, for the report. In the consultations, I don't see Dr. Stewart's name on here. I would have loved to have her here to talk to us about it. The other thing, I'm really, I know some of these people. I have neighbors that I just can't understand it. But the people that have gotten a vaccine, and I'm sure everyone I'm looking at on the screen are among them. How comfortable are the other employees if there's an employee that is not vaccinated working with them? And what if the employee that is not vaccinated is working directly with the public, and they're working for the town? So I'm more inclined for option 1 with a really heavy heart. I mean, I think that Sean made a really, really good point about the timing of this all, in terms of what the province said on Friday, and it looks like that a lot of places, if things keep going well, come January 17th, I think, that those requirements for proof of vaccine are going to disappear, and that with any luck by the end of March, we'll be over this. But I in my humble opinion, I believe that COVID and this virus is going to be with us for the rest of our lives, probably, and we'll have to have some sort of protection at regular intervals, just like everything else, to take care of it. So I think the sooner the better that I think that this is going to be the way it's going to be for the rest of the time, just like all kinds of different terrible diseases that we need vaccines for. So I think we all need to be vaccinated. So with heavy heart, I say number one.
Thanks, Councillor Brennan. We've got Councillor McKenna next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report. It is a difficult conversation, and I come out of the healthcare sector. We had this conversation 20 years ago. Many parts of the healthcare system require mandatory influenza shots, all kinds of testing. You're working with vulnerable people, and then they also use the occupational health and safety, which is the key driver for me. This is an occupational health and safety issue, both for the people who work for us and, as Councillor Brennan points out, members of the public who come in contact with this. It is difficult, it's hard, but it's not new. It's quite legal. It's quite ethical for me. For people who, if we adopt this policy as written, and if we have to terminate someone, there are appeal processes built into termination policy. So it's not, they can follow those either through their unions or through their legal advice. There are avenues if we've done something wrong and we've taken a shortcut, which I don't think we would do. Those terminations have their own ways of ensuring that fairness and the policies are followed carefully. So I'm not concerned about that. So I'm like Councillor Brennan, very much the county council. I sent my proof of vaccination in, or I can't go to the meetings. All of their employees have to be vaccinated, or they will be terminated. The public health department has the same policy. This is not. This is the trend. If down the road we want to change it, it won't be in 3 months. Even if the province says we don't need a passport, this is a policy that for many reasons we would want to leave in place. Just because the province says they want to eliminate the passport, that doesn't mean we should allow unvaccinated employees regular work. So I just, millions are dead, and we're putting people at risk. And I too heard from a couple of the people who use our facilities, and they said, I'm healthy, I'm young, I feel strong, I think I'll survive it. And and we'll reach out to them and say, this is not really about you. This is about the people you're working with and the members of the public. Please, just to remind you of that. It's so anyways, I'm on with Councillor Brennan on number one, that this is just too important a conversation, and thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McKenna. Councillor Allen, did you have comments?
Yeah, no, I'm number one as well, and I feel badly if people are struggling with this, but for me, it's about the majority of people. I mean, I don't want to work in an environment where other people may be infecting us who have got vaccinated. I struggled with the vaccination. I read things and I talked to doctor, because I struggled with it because I have some health issues. But from all of those people, they said the risk is so much more dangerous than not getting it. So I don't know. I just think it's the best thing we should be doing, setting an example as leaders in the community. Thanks.
Councillor Allen. I'm going to share my points and then we can go around for a second round if needed. Right now we've got 3 for 3 and 3 for 1. Sorry, just a second here. I guess it's an incredibly difficult subject to talk about because it's personal to everybody. I think of the people that are close to my heart that are getting their 3rd dose. And when you think of the risk that could be presented to them when people are against this, and you see some of the ridiculousness out there with the opposition to it, it's easy to get angry. But I think really in the quality of a democracy is shown with how how the majority treats the minority. And I think in this situation, it really applies. I echo Councillor Brennan's comments that I wish Dr. Stewart was here. I'm going to give my understanding, and if that's incorrect, anybody, I welcome a correction. But from the way I see it, I'm vaccinated. I've got a chance. If I contract COVID, I can still be a carrier and I can still infect other people. So I could infect somebody that I run into, and the people at greatest risk of that are the unvaccinated. At the same time, if those unvaccinated people are getting tested 2 or 3 times a week, we have with pretty good certainty that that if it's coming in negative, that they're clean, where we don't have the same certainty by the vaccinated employees. If that logic holds, that to me is enough to support option 3. I think secondary reasons for supporting option 3 come down to the fact that this policy may no longer be relevant by March 31st. And I think that on that side of it, asking our volunteers to comply with this policy, I'm not convinced that that's a good use of staff resources, because we've said to our volunteers that they can't come into the building, we can't meet in person, we're keeping them at home. At that point, I think it's an overstep to say that every volunteer member of every committee needs to submit to the town and be a part of that verification process. Definitely people working with the public, definitely people that are coming into our facilities, but if somebody's coming on a Zoom call, to me, it seems like an overstep on the town's part. So I'm a vote for option 3. I'll give anybody a chance now to correct me or to adjust their vote, but right now we've got 4 for 3 and 3 for 1. Councillor Alford, then Councillor Dwyer.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the comments that my colleagues have made. And we have all, I won't even speak for anyone else. I have worked very hard for the last 2 years to ensure, to the point of, like we all have, isolating yourself from your friends, to protect 2 little boys who are 7 and 5. I've worked really hard. I've given up a lot. Most of us have. And as you have all spoken, it's something occurred to me that, and I don't know who said it, but that the needs of the one can't outweigh the needs of the many. And in saying that, and I think Councillor Brennan and Councillor McKenna, we have a responsibility as an employer. The many is the 93% that we have double vaxxed. And so I am going to endorse option 1, not 3.
So the consensus has shifted. We've got Councillor Dwyer, then Mayor Panko.
Thank you. I've lost my headphones. Chris, can you just confirm that my audio is okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Thank you. I'm going to maintain my position at option 3. I can appreciate the concerns that Councillor McKenna voiced regarding obligations under health and safety. I feel that we can still maintain those obligations by requiring additional testing for our employees who are unvaccinated. I think we can demonstrate through that policy that we are doing our best to work with our employees to ensure that they are healthy when they come to work, that they are not putting those lives at risk, particularly for vulnerable populations. But I still don't believe that it is our right to require any individual to undertake a vaccine should they not choose. And in doing so, it is a choice.
they will have expenses incurred with the testing requirements, the additional testing requirements. I have no problem if there are additional requirements for them to wear a mask at all times, regardless of what happens with masking laws in the future. And I believe that if we are going to make concessions, excuse me, to allow people to continue to hold employment with us, that it is reasonable for us to extend additional circumstances under which they operate. So I can appreciate the comments that my colleagues have levied, but I am still of the position that there are extenuating circumstances on a case-by-case basis, in addition to medical exemptions as prescribed right now, that warrant consideration on a case-by-case basis. And for that reason, I maintain that option 3 should be on the table.
Thanks, Councillor Dwyer. Mayor Panko.
I know we're talking about a handful of people, but obviously the impact on their lives could be profound if they're terminated their employment as of December 31st. And frankly, I have a difficult time understanding and accepting why someone would make a choice not to get vaccinated unless there is a very rare medical reason to do so. However, I'm also not in their shoes. I'm also not understanding their own mental health and any impact any individual may have with anxiety or other mental health challenges that may inhibit their ability to see clearly through this pandemic. And I appreciate Councillor McKenna's comments regarding even though the mandatory vaccine policy passport system may be gone as of the end of March, obviously we still want to see everyone fully vaccinated. So what I'm maybe hoping in this situation is I absolutely see the merit of option 1. I see some rationale for option 3. And what I'm hoping is perhaps if committee would be agreeable to a modified option 1 that would accommodate unvaccinated individual staff as of December 31st to go through a 3-month period when we would see the opportunity for work from home with no contact with other staff or the public, or if they're going to be in the building, there has to be mandatory testing 3 times a week at their cost. And if the moratorium, if the mandatory vaccine policy is lifted on March 31st, then we reconsider what we do with unvaccinated people at that point. Obviously, we can't make a permanent accommodation for people who are not vaccinated, but if the powers to be at Health Canada and the Provincial Ministry of Health deem that as of a certain point in time, i.e. March 31st, that the risk is so low that we can lift, they will lift the mandatory vaccine passport policy, that I would hate to see us lose staff when we are so close to potentially better days. I agree with what's said. I think it's with us forever. And I worry about variants coming in from other parts of the world when we know many countries in the world have a 3% vaccination rate. This could be a challenge for a long period of time. I'm just wondering if there's an appetite for some amendment to option 1.
Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of points. And I know it sounds callous. We're not forcing people to be vaccinated. They have a choice. If you want to continue working here, you will be vaccinated. We're not forcing, we're not holding anyone down and putting a vaccination in their arm. That'll be their decision to do that. So I wanted to clear that up. And the second is a policy has to be practical, and you have to be able to operationalize it. Some of the suggestions, if we have 6 people who are getting tested 3 times a week, and we've made these accommodations that no, on Tuesdays you can do this, and on Thursdays you have to do that. I just don't see how management can operationalize something like that. It's just, once you start making custom accommodations, even if it's 4 to 6 or 8 people, I just can't imagine as a former executive trying to manage that. It has to be reasonable, these accommodations, and I'm sorry, I too, if council would feel more comfortable, we could invite Dr. Stewart to come, and I'm pretty sure she'd be amenable to it. But I'm still with option 1. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McKenna. CEO Morris, did you have a response there?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The medical officer of health's name has come up several times, so I just want to share with the committee that we did have this discussion at one of our emergency control group meetings, and I think it's fairly obvious that she's an advocate of vaccinations for the public, but her position in terms of employment policies is that's a decision between the employer and their employees, and she chose not to wade in on advocating for employment policies for specific employers, but rather she took the general position that vaccines are good for the society in which we live.
Thanks, CEO Morris. And maybe just could you give your take on option 3 and how onerous that would be for management, or if it's even feasible?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a really good point. We did have that discussion. It becomes a little bit complicated when you have a snowplow operator that has to go out at 2 in the morning and they have to get a rapid antigen testing, and Shoppers doesn't open till 9 in the morning. So we would have to work around that. So there are some logistical challenges with that. We felt if the complexion of our workforce is any indication of the vaccination rate in the counties, and I'd just like to remind Council that we're at 97% with the first vaccine. One would expect the people that got the first vaccine will get their second vaccine. So if we accept that assumption, we're talking about 3% of the population that at this point in time appear not to want to get vaccinated. That could still rise. So we're talking about a very, very small percentage. So if we extrapolate that over our workforce, again, it's a small number of people that we would potentially have to accommodate. And we felt that was doable for those that have a bona fide reason not to get vaccinated. A human rights or a medical rationale for not getting vaccinated. If we extend that to those that simply choose not to get vaccinated, it complicates things logistically for the employer, especially those people that work in remote locations that can't get to a drugstore before their shift to have their test done. So I would summarize that by saying, can we work with it? We can, but it makes it complicated. The more people we have doing routine testing, the more complicated it gets to run an operation.
Thanks, CEO Morris. Councillor Brennan.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, this is not fun. It's not easy. It's not pleasurable for anybody. But I gotta agree with Councillor McKenna. I mean, it's in fairness to the public, in fairness to the employees that work for us that have taken the step. I continue to support option 1, and the other part or point maybe to make is there's ample opportunity to get vaccinated by December 31st, and I would hope and plead that if you're able to, please get vaccinated, and we can get through this. And like I said before, this will be a yearly thing, and people, I'm sure I'm not a doctor, but you know, my feeling is we'll be living with this for probably the rest of our lives, and we'll have a handle on it. It won't be a pandemic anymore, but we need to take care of it. And so I remain with option one, as I said before, with heavy heart.
Thanks, Councillor Brennan. I guess, I don't know, I'll give one last comment on it and then we'll do a straw vote. To me, it's the unvaccinated right now that are at the greatest risk. The testing mitigates that. I hope they get vaccinated. I'm sure many people are heading down to the pharmacy to get vaccinated as these things come through, but I wouldn't want to see anyone lose their job when there was options available. So I'm sticking with option 3. Councillor Alford, final comment.
Just an answer to something you just said, Councillor McGuire, and that is that the unvaccinated are at the most risk, and that means anybody under 12. So I'm going to stay with 1.
All right, so everybody in favor of option 1? And everyone in favor of option 3? So that has been carried with a split 4-3 vote to our next council meeting. Director Costello, anything else before we move on?
Nothing further.
Great. Thank you for that difficult one tonight. Now we'll move on to 8.7 that was added to the agenda through Mayor Panko. Changes to the building code.
There, unmute myself. Yes, so as you are all aware, the Housing Advisory Committee has been working hard at implementing the 16 additional recommendations from the Housing Task Force. And through this process, new issues have also emerged. And one that became fairly apparent was a limitation within the Ontario Building Code that does not require builders to build what we would consider to be accessible housing. So to my understanding, I think once you're over a certain number of units, I believe it's 8, I believe 15% of units in a development have to be barrier free. So wider doors, I guess wider halls, accessible to enable accessibility. But in conversations with the task force, and particularly one member of the task force who does live with mobility challenges, barrier free doesn't mean accessible. And accessible means lower countertops. It means grab bars where needed. It means bathrooms which are built to accommodate people with accessibility needs. And so the outcome of the discussion was a resolution that was moved by Councillor Allen, seconded by Courtney Priest, whereas the Ontario Building Code establishes detailed technical and administrative requirements and minimum standards for building construction, whereas the Ontario Building Code regulates the minimum compliance requirements for barrier-free construction for certain new and altered buildings. The code does not adequately provide for accessible and universal housing requirements that enable usability of the space for all residents. Now, therefore, be resolved that Council of the Corporation of the Town of Smiths Falls is hereby requests that the Province of Ontario amend the Ontario Building Code to provide for accessible housing to accommodate all members of the community. And this resolution be circulated to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, all municipalities in Ontario, and applicable supporting agencies. So that resolution was supported by the task force, and I'm asking that committee support that resolution this evening.
Thanks, Mayor Panko. I'm seeing nodding heads. I think we've all seen files come across our desks where a developer promises something, but it's not really what's needed out there. So I think this is great. Any other comments before we move on to the next one? All right, you've got your directions. So 8.8 changes to the 2022 budget.
Great, thank you. So the other, one major other discussion at our September 29th meeting was related to the community-wide affordable housing, the Affordable Housing Community Improvement Plan. And council obviously has been supportive of accelerating that development. And what the task force wants to ensure is that this is suitably funded. So we had a broad discussion on how much money should be committed to ensure that there is meaningful dollars in this affordable housing CIP to make the difference that the task force intends. And I believe council obviously supports the task force and advisory committee in the objective of trying to create more affordable housing. So there was a recommendation that came out that I will read shortly. And my hope is that the committee simply, I guess, supports this recommendation being included in our budget for budget discussions, not a final decision on it tonight. So moved by Lindsay Blair, seconded by Jeff Mills, that the Housing Advisory Committee recommends that council commits 2% of budgeted revenue to support affordable housing. So our community grants are 1%. It's been suggested that we commit 2% to trying to provide housing for the members of our community, especially those where affordability is a real challenge.
Thanks, Mayor Panko. We've got Councillor Brennan, Dwyer, then Alfred.
Yeah, I mean, it's 3 hours into a meeting and I'm not really ready to commit to 2% of the budget to, I understand that this is a #1 priority, but let's bring that up at a CAL meeting with the report out of a budget. But I mean, it's pretty late at night to commit 3% to the budget of we have anyway, whatever it is.
Thanks, Councillor Brennan. Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be fast. I appreciate the sentiment that we should have something in reserve for this program, but I'd like to be a little bit more informed as to where that money is going and how it's being used. I think committing 2% to something that may not be practical and realistic for implementation is just going to bite our hands and limit our ability to make other budgetary decisions. I'd almost rather, Mayor Pankow, work with a fixed figure rather than a percentage if we are going to consider this. But I think, you know, you take a funding program like the town of Perth, who decided to offer a grant program for accessory dwelling units as a means of creating affordable housing, and their uptake this year has been 0 because the program is just not practical. $5,000 for somebody to build an accessory dwelling unit doesn't even buy you the lumber. So earmarking those funds without knowing how they're going to be used or whether or not they're practical to me is not a wise choice, particularly given the conversation we've already had tonight about how tight this budget is going to be. I appreciate the efforts for affordable housing, but I think I need more information before I commit to it.
Thanks, Councillor Dwyer. We've got Councillor Alfred, then Councillor McKenna.
Yeah, I would rather deal with this not as a walk onto the agenda. I think it's going to take a little more time and a little more discussion. So I also would defer this whole conversation and whatever information that staff may have to add to this, I would be interested in hearing as well.
It's Councillor Alfred. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think if I understood, the mayor is asking just that we would consider this during budget deliberations. And if so I'm supportive of that. I do agree with my colleagues. Along with that would come some report that would talk about the hows and whys and do's of it, 2% or 1 or whatever it ends up being. And if I'm not mistaken, Belleville's a couple of years ahead of us on this, and you know, we could have a chance to look and to see if Perth isn't working for that reason, why are other communities working with? So, but I'm fine with putting it into the pot for budget deliberations when that time comes. And in the meantime, I agree with my colleagues, getting more information would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McKenna. I'm hearing general support to talk about this at a future meeting. One comment I'd like to bring up before we move on is I'd much rather see Program 5 tax abatement than a set percentage of the budget. If we take a hit from future revenues, it also might be a way to squeeze this into a tight budget. So like Councillor Dwyer, I'd like to see some more options, like to see it, but it definitely, it'd be great to do something. And Mayor Penko, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, I guess the key, I guess I didn't explain it well, the key, I guess, point here would be to have a placeholder in the budget for this. And because of this, when the first draft does come, that is recognized in there, so that as this flashes out, hopefully before final budget, and partway through the process, there's greater clarity as to how that would be used. The important part now is simply having it as a placeholder for further discussion.
All right, do we want to do a straw vote for a placeholder? All those in favor? 3.
Hey, sorry.
Did you have a follow-up to that, or?
No.
Okay. So I think let's keep having the conversation, and let's look at more options, but we don't have the consensus for that tonight. Any final comments on that one before we move on to our last item? All right, so 8.9 is to with Deputy Clerk Bennett to add 3 members to the Downtown Business Association.
Yes, tonight I'm just seeking council approval to bring forward a resolution to the next meeting of council to appoint Scott Mousseau, Elizabeth Wood, and Leslie Lentz to the Downtown Business Association Board.
Great, thank you, Nadine. Seeing thumbs up, so we're good to go. We'll bring that to our next council meeting. One last point before we adjourn. Chair Bingley from our Accessibility Committee is distributing orange signs for accessible trick-or-treating. A lot of houses have steps and they're hard to get to. So by saying you're going to do accessible trick-or-treating means that you'll get the candy to wherever it needs to go so that everybody can get some. So happy Halloween to everybody. And if you can do anything to make your place more accessible, it'll be appreciated in town. With that, we'll take a motion to adjourn. Councillor Dwyer, seconded by Councillor Brennan, that the committee adjourn its proceedings at 7:59 p.m. and stand so adjourned until the next duly called committee meeting. Thank you, Nadine, for helping me get through this month. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you.